A strong villain is the backbone of any tale, which is especially true for D&D, which is essentially an interactive story. In this video, I will be showing you how to create a memorable, feared, and most importantly, compelling big bad. Warning: there are spoilers ahead for Avengers Infinity War and Avatar: The Last Airbender. When creating a big bad, you have to make them the protagonists of their own stories. And what does every good protagonist have? Goals, a backstory/motivation, and a strong drive. Your villain must have all of these things if you want them to be memorable. Let's look at Thanos as an example of a big bad. He is an excellent example of this character type done right, and the reason why Infinity War was so good. Thanos, surprisingly, was the protagonist of that film. Let's break it down into goals and backstory/motivation. Thanos' goal is to obtain all of the Infinity Stones. This goal could be broken down into smaller steps, which would determine his actions on a smaller scale. His backstory is that his home planet was destroyed due to overpopulation, which leads to his motivation, which is to solve the universe's overpopulation problem. He does this so other civilizations don't come to the same fate as his own. You see how if we view the story from Thanos' perspective, he's a good guy, he's a hero? This is the goal when creating villains. When you are creating your big bad, you should think about it as if you were creating a hero, but exaggerate their ideals to the point where it becomes extremism. Then you have a villain. This step is crucial for making both you and your players understand why the big bad acts the way that they do. So now that we have covered making your villains the protagonists of their own story, let's move on to the second step, which is having your villain have an active, tangible impact on the world around them. Throughout your campaign, your big bad should impact the world and the party many times. If your villain doesn't make changes to the world and just shows up at the last session with an army of random demons from hell and is like, well, time to kill y'all, then that's not a compelling bad guy. Your players will just feel like it's another mini-boss at the end of your campaign. However, if your villain is constantly the cause of the party and all world's problems, then your players will be more invested in defeating them. They will have a personal connection with the big bad, which will affect the final conflict and make it feel super climactic. There are many ways to have your big bad influence the world around them. They can either be doing it in secret, or they could be blatantly evil but too powerful for your party to attack them yet. You can have them secretly controlling aggressive governments, or have them openly conquer the nation's capital. Whatever it is that your big bad does, make sure that it influences the world, while also helping them work towards their personal goals. Don't have your villains do things that are out of line with their character. The next step expands on the previous one, but you have to have your big bad interact with the party. Now, this might seem obvious, but I think it's very important. The party has to know the villain. They should have, if not met them personally, then at least interacted with them in an impactful way. If your party doesn't interact with the big bad until they fight at the end of the campaign, it'll feel anticlimactic regardless of how well you plan the encounter. This is because they haven't had enough time to get to know the person, to grow to hate them. An example of this done correctly and incorrectly in the same show is Avatar: The Last Airbender. Which fight was more compelling? Azula versus Zuko, or Ozai versus Aang? For the sake of my credibility, I hope that you said Azula versus Zuko, and that's because Azula has been actively impacting Team Avatar for the better part of the show. She was constantly interfering, fighting, almost killing, tracking, and just being an overall nuisance to the party since early season 2. Ozai, on the other hand, was probably the weakest character in Avatar. He just wanted power for the sake of ruling, because his grandfather started a war, because fire go brrr. Azula was much more interesting and compelling, and it's because we know her. We know that she believes in the Fire Nation's rule. We know that she has a superiority complex. We know that she has impossible expectations of herself. Make your big bad similar to Azula. Always in the way, but never really in a situation where she could die. A more D&D related example of this would be Strahd von Zarovich from The Curse of Strahd. He is arguably one of D&D's most famous villains, and it's because he is a very active participant in the story. He interacts with the party multiple times. Your villains, especially your big bads, have to have a large part in the story if you want their conclusion to be emotionally impactful. This next step is shorter, but it's also important. Have the big bad's goals directly oppose the entire party's motivations, not just one character. Don't make the big bad of your story an evil paladin on a quest to kill Pelor, which directly opposes your party's paladin's love for Pelor. While this could be a good villain, they would work better for a side quest or a smaller arc. Making the big bad have a stronger antagonistic relationship with one party member above the others will make the rest of the party feel like sidekicks to the protagonist, and no players want to feel that way. Make the big bad everyone's villain equally. And that leaves me to the final step of creating a big bad. Ensure that your villain has strong philosophical reasoning behind their actions, which ideally contradict or run parallel with members of the party. What I mean by this is having the villain either disagree entirely with your party, or having them share views with your party but taking it too far. Both of these options can yield amazing results for a villain. Once again, I will be demonstrating this with Thanos, as he is probably the most famous and best example of a big bad in modern times. Thanos believes in a version of utilitarianism, an ethical theory credited to Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, which states that an action that is for the greater good of society is therefore good. Know who else believes in utilitarianism? Iron Man. But Thanos takes these ideals to an extremist level that almost contradicts his core belief. By erasing half of humanity, he is only really helping half. His extremism makes the audience and heroes unsympathetic towards him, which makes him the villain. This is an example of a villain's philosophy running parallel to a character. Captain America, on the other hand, follows a version of deontology, an ethical theory associated with Immanuel Kant. Deontology runs in direct opposition of utilitarianism. It examines whether an action is right or wrong, regardless of the consequences of this action. This is portrayed when Captain America refuses to kill Vision to destroy the Mind Stone, because, regardless if it would save the universe, killing Vision is wrong according to Cap's beliefs. This is part of the reason Thanos is such a good antagonist for the Avengers. He contradicts some members of the party's philosophical viewpoints and aligns with others in an extremist way. Now, I know this is more philosophy talk than you would expect from a D&D video, but creating a villain with opposing or parallel views is surprisingly easy. Firstly, I'll show you how to create a villain with parallel views. Identify what a character in your party believes, what their motivations are, what their goals are. Then ask yourself, if this character took what they believe and pushed it too far, what would that look like? Once you have your answer, you have a villain which is compelling to at least one member of the party. If a few of your party members share a philosophical outlook, then this method works even better. Now, if you want to have a villain that opposes the party philosophically, then identify your party's beliefs, then ask yourself what the opposite viewpoint of this would be. Point out the flaws in what your party believes, make a good logical argument against their views, then push that argument too far. This method of creating villains is very effective for creating villains that your players just can't stand. And that'll about cover this video. Obviously there are many ways to create good villains, and I've just shared with you what I think are the most important aspects of creating a villain for your D&D campaign. Just as a side note, I'm just starting out this YouTube channel, so if you could please give this video a like, comment and subscribe, that would help me out so much. Either way, thank you for watching and keep adventuring.